Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and considering Steam Next Fest is in full swing, I thought I'd take advantage, download a whole bunch of demos, and see how I felt about them. In that regard, I'll be focusing down to three particular demos, that being the demos for Severed Steel, Dread Templar, and White Hell. As for why I chose those games in particular, largely because they fall within that ballpark of first-person shooters, and each seem to be doing something interesting in their own right. So, without further ado, let's get down to business. Now, a few of you might be thinking, but Icarus, this debuted before Next Fest, and to that I'd say, shut up, I'm only just getting to it now, so it still counts. Anyway, Severed Steel bills itself as a stylish and visceral single-player FPS featuring a fluid stunt system, destructible voxel environments, loads of bullet time, a unique one-armed protagonist, and a dark electronic soundtrack. Now, at first, I actually found myself fumbling quite a lot with the varied movement mechanics of play here during the course of Severed Steel. It's something that certainly took a while to sink in. You got a lot to acclimatize to. For example, you've got diving and sliding, each of which bound to a separate button, Q, and control respectively, and both of those are quite vital moves because they also grant you a little bit of immunity to incoming enemy fire. You've also got the ability to wall run, which grants you a similar kind of immunity, double jump, which does not, and last but not least, you can also kick, which proves to be quite useful when it comes to kicking doors so hard that they knock an enemy out, or removing a shield from an enemy's grasp. When it comes to bundling this up in a neat and tidy descriptive bundle, I would say that this feels like a cross between the movement mechanics of Titanfall and Fear. Elements of the latter are certainly felt quite strongly with regards to the enemies that you'll fight, the environments you fight them within, and, of course, the slow-mo. As for how it all feels to play in the moment, it's a very fast, fluid, arcade-tinged experience. That latter element certainly felt with regards to the on-screen prompts that display when you deliver something like a wall run kill or even a headshot, not to mention the actual presence of a literal arcade mode itself. The weapons that you wield here, for the most part, all have a fair degree of satisfying punch to them. They feel powerful, they'll typically take down enemies in a relatively short degree of time, and as for how you'll swap between them, you'll find that your character will freely discard any empty gun, and then just hoover up a nearby viable one, and just carry on the rampage that way. You don't have to fiddle with weapon swap keys, you're only going to use one gun at a time, and if you're tired of the one that you've got, you can just straight up yeet it at the nearest enemy, which I've got to admit is quite fun. Another element of Severed Steel that's quite entertaining is the fact that it is in absolutely no way stingy when it comes to liberal application of that slow-mo ability. You get a fair chunk of it to begin with, and it can be quite easily refilled with successive enemy kills. It's quite vital to use as well. Some rooms will be absolutely teeming with enemies, and using that slow-mo to just zero in and plink away at the heads of those enemies is firstly going to keep you alive, and secondly going to make you feel very, very powerful. It's got that feeling of smug power fantasy going for it very well. It's like I'm in my own personal sci-fi tinged John Woo movie, and I quite enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot. I'm greatly looking forward to seeing what else it'll have to offer when it comes time for full release, specifically with regards to that destructible voxel element in its levels. I didn't use it a whole lot, aside from, I guess, diving through windows and the occasional plasma arm hole in the wall later on, but yeah, pleasantly surprised by this one. It's always a good sign when a demo leaves you desperately wanting more. I can't help but feel that I got off on the wrong foot with Dread Templar, and the base reason for that is that I chose to play it on hard for my first playthrough, one that sees enemies receive a significant health boost, but doesn't really see many other elements of the game tweaked to compensate. The sum effect being that you feel tremendously weak, ammo feels in very short supply, and it's just it's not an optimal first-time experience, let me just put it that way. But anyway, I came back to it and played it on normal, and hey, what do you know, it's suddenly a much more enjoyable experience. So what exactly is Dread Templar? Well, it bills itself as a fast-paced retro FPS that combines 90s classic shooter elements, read Quake, with modern, skill-based FPS controls. Read the dash mechanic out of Doom Eternal. Anyway, you're a Dread Templar who has entered Hell seeking revenge. Got to admit, that's about as specific as it gets, but hey, let's face it, you don't need much justification to plunge into the Dark Realm itself and make everything die. Somewhat generously, Dread Templar kicks off by equipping you with dual-wielded pistols, as well as a sword, best used for slashing at enemies getting all up in your grill, but can also be transformed into a rather powerful throwing spear. You've got access to a dash, and believe it or not, you've also got access to a slow-mo power-up. Now, this does take time to fill, you'll see it in the blue bar at the top, but when you trigger it, everything else slows down while you remain at full speed. As for how all that action plays out, you'll be battling your way through a variety of brown and grey dungeons, maybe the occasional visit above ground, and just holding down the mouse button until everything dies. Occasionally tapping that dash, and then wondering why you can't do it a little bit more frequently, but that actually ties into the upgrade system that is threaded throughout. You see, you also need to collect blood gems and upgrade tokens in order to improve various aspects of either your character, your swords, or your guns. As for the upgrades that you'll be able to acquire during the course of the demo, they're kind of piddly, all things considered, but that's entirely understandable considering this is a early slice of the game itself. They're not going to put all of the heavy upgrades right up front. If anything, at this point, the upgrades and the blood gems required to unlock the said upgrade slots are pretty much just justifications for a little bit of exploration, poking your nose in various secrets and exploring extra sections of level, which is no bad thing. As for other weapons that you'll pick up during the course of this demo, you'll gain access to a pump-action shotty, which I have to admit could do with a fair bit more beef in its boom. It is supplanted later on by the double barrel, but once again, more beef please. Something else that you'll acquire, which fits into the dual pistol slot, is the dual SMGs. Same ammo type, vastly increased fire rate, and some extra cool factor silencers on the end, which I doubt is really going to do you much use in hell where you're not trying to be stealthy in the first place, but it looks cool, that's all you need to know. Mechanically, the combat here is a-okay, pretty much exactly what you'd expect. A nice focus on fast-paced gunplay and outmaneuvering your enemies, pleasingly accompanied by that aforementioned slow-mo and dash, though I feel it is definitely at its best when it's in more open, maneuverable environments. There's some occasions where you're trying to dash away from certain enemies and get yourself snagged on bits of level geometry, especially in more narrow corridors, but out in the open, the gameplay does flow a lot smoother. I do, however, have a bit of a bugbear with how the throwing sword works. At this point, it's kind of clunky. You gotta wait for a cooldown once you've thrown it, and during that time you cannot use melee whatsoever. I feel like it could be made a lot more fun. For example, just running over and picking up your sword to circumvent cooldown. That would instantly increase the fun factor with that thing. But even then, I'm not sure that would rectify the inherent clunkiness of switching between sword modes as it currently stands. I feel like if it defaulted back to slashing state when you reacquired it, that would solve a few issues. But still, remains to be seen. It is a demo after all, and tweaks can of course still be made. Not a particular fan of the save system. You have to go and visit specific save points. You cannot quick save at any given time, and I'm not entirely sure why this is a thing. I'm sure we've been down this road before game design wise. I'm sure everyone collectively decided that it wasn't all that great. But hey, who knows? It's still a demo, things remain to be tweaked, things remain to be polished, and you know what? I feel like this has certainly got potential. It's not quite there yet. I'd have to see how that upgrade system shakes out, but even then, I'd be hard-pressed to say that I didn't have a fair degree of fun. I think it's safe to say that White Hell is very visually distinct from the last two games that I've talked about here during the course of this video. It is simple, it is blocky, the animations could be somewhat regarded as stiff. That said, there is just oodles of charm and personality emanating from White Hell. In terms of the description, White Hell is a retro-style first-person shooter set in a frostbound Finland, set sometime after the apocalypse, features a protagonist that is extremely hungover, hence the sunglasses, and is justifiably pissed off at all of these goddamn neo-Nazis shitting the place up. I'd hesitate to describe the combat as anything particularly complex, but what's here is absolutely solid. And further to that, this right here is exactly what I mean when I say a shotgun has beef. As for the core gameplay, it is pretty much exactly what you see here, making your way through various levels and blasting any neo-Nazi scum that does get in your way. The levels themselves are, believe it or not, quite nicely constructed. I found them to be quite enjoyable to navigate. There's good excuses to split off from the beaten track, and it'll often send you in alternate directions, breaking up the flow of the level and making sure it doesn't feel too linear. Of particular note is the city level later on in the demo that feels like it should be a nightmare to navigate, but turns out to be actually quite enjoyable. It's the kind of level design that honestly impresses me, the kind of stuff that feels like it's taking you on a winding, elaborate route, but somehow always manages to land you facing where you need to go. Anyway, have I mentioned that you can deflect anything with the kick? I mean anything. Not just rocks, not just knives, but bullets, rockets, and you better believe it, goddamn lasers. Seriously, Duke's mighty boot ain't got shit on this guy. Another interesting quirk of White Hell is that after a certain point you'll also gain the ability to use Sisu, which is magical energy. This manifests in the form of special weapons. In the demo you can choose between the Sword of Destiny and the Tick Gun. I freely admit that one sounds cooler than the other, but believe me, both are extremely useful. The Sword of Destiny throwing energy blades at enemies, allowing you to attack them over distance, whereas the Tick Gun fires ticks. You may scoff, but these fellas will attach themselves to an enemy, expand, explode, and also deliver area of effect damage to any enemies nearby. Sisu mode is recharged via killing enemies, and is essentially your excuse to go ham on large groups of enemies, but mercifully doesn't automatically trigger when full, allowing you to save it for critical situations. That's not to say that outside of Sisu mode you won't be able to have some fun. The shotgun, as I've already mentioned, delivers a third degree of beef. The machine gun, ooh, yes, I'm a fan of that. Oh, and let's not forget the Flammenwerfer. If I'm gonna be honest, I feel like flamethrowers are a tough gun to get right in video games, but hey, sets Nazis on fire, can't complain. Speaking of Nazis, there's a fair variety of them to combat during the course of White Hell. Start with your bottom layer goons, consisting of rock-throwing skinheads and bandana-clad knife throwers. Then you get to the Gestapo-looking Nazis with the machine guns. You've also, of course, got dogs to deal with. Sadly, these are not good boys. These are very bad boys. These are Nazi dogs. Their only pets shall be received in lead. And then you got these guys, with dual rocket launchers strapped to their shoulders. Somewhat reminding me of the Mancubus, come to think of it. Maybe this is before they got dragged down to hell and decided to dine on the all-you-can-eat hell buffet. In any case, I feel like these varied enemy types are applied quite well across the course of White Hell's levels, allowing for a decent range of encounters and making sure that the action doesn't get stale. It may be surprising for you to hear, but out of the 3 demos that I've played for this video, I'd say that White Hell is the one that entertained me the most. I mean, don't get me wrong, Severed Steel is a close second, and Dread Templar isn't too far behind that, but this just has something going for it, something that appeals to me, something that just makes me smile. It's just littered with fun little touches, some surprisingly good level design, and I have to admit, some very endearing applications of gore. So there you go, 3 demos that I played during the course of Steam Next Fest. I'm sure there's plenty more that I should play, but to be honest, my time these days is a little bit more limited than it used to be, so I'm grateful at the very least I was able to carve out some of it to give these 3 a bit of attention. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed this video, hopefully giving you a bit of insight to some stuff that you may or may not have been aware of during the course of Next Fest, and I'm always eager to hear what you guys thought of it as well, so feel free to let me know in the comments below. But until next time, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.